I'm so excited to see everybody today. Thanks for joining me and for the audience to hear about some really. I'm excited about this podcast. I'm really excited about this time I'm going to be able to spend with a friend and colleague, Richard Best. And hi, Richard. How are you doing today?
Hi, Mark. Doing great. It's awesome to be present.
Good. So, Richard, as we get to as definitely as the audience gets to know you a little bit, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure. So, educationally, my background's in kinesiology, both undergrad and graduate school. Both were really designed more for management level type roles in sports related businesses. And as life would happen, none of my jobs were in those areas. And it really kind of led me into healthcare. So, working as a paramedic and tied into emergency medicine to actually running a psychiatry department for a hospital in Dallas, and then eventually moving into my coaching practice. On the personal side, I'm in a second marriage. Wife Kim and I've been married a little over 12 years, and we don't have kids, but I do enjoy golf, as you know, because that's how we met. And that's sort of a passion of mine away from work.
Right. Oh, interesting. Well, that's great to know. It's always fascinating because I get to know something about people that I interview that I didn't know before. So I didn't know that you were a paramedic before. So
Mhm.
tell me about, so what is the driving force? I know you've gone out and now you've started your own business or your own practice. So what
Mhm.
did you tell me specifically about what was kind of that driving force? What was the catalyst there to actually create to go out on your own and actually what's the story behind that?
Sure. Well, let's go back to 2008.
Hmm.
I'm in the beginning of 2008. It's the economy's downturned. I'm actually running psychiatry for a Presbyterian hospital, and what they brought me in to do and what they were needing in that moment, the skill sets didn't quite align as well as they could have. So we decided to part ways. And I'm sitting there kind of going, see, what do I do? I think coaching is where I need to go
Hmm.
because I'd actually done that. A mutual friend of ours, Chris Harsdorf, hired me to help him with Executive Solution Partners at one point, and learned that I had a talent with coaching and facilitation. So I took that, and in that moment of 2008, the first quarter, I'm leaving a job, which means my income is decreasing to zero. um, I'm in the middle of a divorce.
Mm.
My dad's going through chemo. I've lost my house, and not really regrettably, but I was getting into a new relationship too early. But those all things were going on, and so really it was just a time of change. And I felt God was leading me to that spot. And as it turns out, my first client I found through my church. I
Hmm.
was
Interesting.
I was ushering with someone that I hadn't had a chance to really get involved in a conversation with much. So I just simply asked a question. So what do you do when you're not ushering? And she shared that she was chief operating officer for a law firm. And she said, what do you do? And I said, I'm starting my coaching practice.
Hmm.
She said, tell me a little bit more about it. And then she said, I think my boss would love to talk to you. And that
Wow.
led to my first client.
Wow, that is a great story. Isn't that amazing?
Hmm.
And it's kind of ironic that happened in a church setting. So that's just fascinating. So that's a great story. But so today, just because when we're actually now segueing into, of course, the meat of our conversation around. So I know that you have a number of specialties, Richard. So one of them I know we're going to talk about two of them. One of them is executive coaching.
Hmm.
And then the other one we wanted to talk about as we segue into another part is around emotional intelligence, because I know you have a lot of expertise around that. So, if you wouldn't mind, could you explain for our audience? I know there's many facets to executive coaching and the
Hmm.
work you do, but if you wouldn't mind just giving kind of a high level overview of what's your philosophy and what that process looks like when you go into a coaching relationship with an executive.
Sure. the philosophy is really tied to some strategies, which I think we'll talk about in a moment. But the process really is around planning and contracting. And in that moment, the first thing that I want to make sure happens is that there's chemistry between me and the potential coachee.
Mhm.
Without that chemistry, the relationship won't survive. From my perspective, won't survive a effective coaching environment. From that, we will try to understand what the goals are,
Mhm.
both from their sponsor as well as from themselves, and then we'll kind of take a look at measuring what that looks like. And I really prefer to do a 360 assessment, which measures emotional intelligence,
Mhm.
as well as how are they showing up in the different groups of individuals, their supervisor, their peers, direct reports,
Mhm.
other individuals, customers, etc.
Right.
Uh, from that, we develop a plan. And when I say we, actually, the coachee develops the plan. I give them a framework. They can't have more than 3 goals because that becomes unwieldy to try and work on. Uh, they have to be measurable goals. They have to figure out what action steps they want to actually do. But I help guide them through that process because many times they'll have a goal, say, I want to communicate better.
Mhm.
And so I say, well, how should we measure that? They go, I don't know. No, so fortunately, we get to talk about how we can measure that. And then once that's set up and the coachee, myself, and the sponsor sign off on the goals, then we go into the coaching conversations.
Mm.
And that happens on a weekly basis. I
Yeah.
prefer 2 hours.
Wow.
Now,
Okay.
there's always pushback by many leaders around a 2 hour meeting. So I try to set it up so I give them the option of doing it early in the morning, say like from 7 to 9. So we're only taking an hour out of a typical business day.
Right.
But I help them understand the purpose of that time frame, and once they try it on, they really embrace it because it's a time where they feel safe. They
Mm.
can share what's going on and not feel judged.
Right. Interesting. Interesting.
Right.
So, how is it that, so why is it so important? Because obviously given the time frame when you started to, your coaching practice, what would you say, why is it so important for companies or specific executives or leaders in those companies? Why is it so important for them to look at and investigate having an outside coach for maybe one or several of their leaders?
Sure. Interestingly enough, I had this conversation with a new client yesterday about outside coaches and helping them understand that an outside coach actually can provide some psychological safety for the individual because many times they may think with an internal coach, they're going to share that information that we've had in the conversation, the
Mm.
details of that. I don't want anybody else to know, or I don't want my peers to know. That'll get shared and it'll be used against them.
Mm.
And so, as an external coach, I don't have a duty to the organization to share that information. Matter of fact, in my contract, always state that those conversations are confidential and I cannot share the details of them. I can share high level aspects, such
Mhm.
as, we're working on the goals. They know what the action steps are because they've already signed off on them. So those I can share, but I can't even share the results of the assessments that we
Mm.
do because those belong to the coachee.
Right.
I encourage them to share them with their supervisor, but it's ultimately up to them. So the outside coach, I think, actually becomes more important the higher we go into an organization because more is at risk for an
Mm.
executive when they are looking to share something. It's lonely at the top, right? And so uh, there's only one person, there's no peers. And when you're at the CEO level, but still, it's a safe place where they can feel um, that they have the capability of sharing anything and not be judged, that there's an advocate for them, and there's no hidden agenda. So I think that's the reason why you want to have an outside coach.
Right. Right.
So
Yeah.
that's how I would approach it.
Sure. And you've mentioned just in the last, just in that response, something I picked up on is around safety. You talked
Mhm.
about safety. Do you feel like, gosh, this is being recorded near the latter stages of 2023. Do you feel like is the safety support system, the safety system for leaders, especially executive leaders now, is it less of a safe environment internally now? Do you feel like there's more at risk because of what's happened in the last few years and what have you? I don't know. What are your thoughts there? Because I really hit on that word safety numerous times and creating a safe environment. What are your thoughts there, just out of interest?
Well, we're starting to dive into the neuroscience of the brain when we talk about psychological safety, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a big part of my coaching process as well, is that we want to leverage how the brain functions. And so, since the brain reacts to anything that appears to be a threat to self,
Mm-hmm.
and there's 5 concepts around that, um, it's going to react in a fight, flee, or freeze mode. So no matter how safe we try to provide it, if the brain doesn't perceive it as safe, then it's going to react in one of those 3 modes. And so in reality, as what I've realized over my time in coaching, as an individual becomes more clear about who they are. For example, for me and my faith, I am a child of God. That's my identity.
Mm-hmm.
And as I become more certain in that, then those threats have less impact on me. So, for example, uncertainty is one of those threats for the brain. I'm not sure what's going to happen. But if I have a better idea and certainty about who I am, the external factors don't change who I am. And therefore, it's less of a threat. And so I don't get emotionally activated. And when I get emotionally activated, I lose access to focus, judgment, decision making,
Hmm.
which is sort of the logic piece. And so
Right.
think about a time where you've had a discourse with someone that you care about and an argument, and you say something you wish you hadn't said later. You start going, oh man, I wish I hadn't said that.
Sure.
It
Sure.
was in that moment. That's that process where that area of the brain we can't access. So for leadership, if we know that we're actually truly safe, that even if my title is no longer exists, then maybe I'll act with more confidence because those threats don't impact me. And that's a big piece that I've probably found in the last year and a half, that confidence is really tied to us feeling safe.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me to act confidently in my role, I need to realize that no matter what happens, I'll still be okay. If I believe that I won't be, then all of a sudden I'm going to start acting defensively and maybe playing not to lose.
Right. Oh, interesting. No, that is so fascinating. And it is so true when I've been in situations like that too, and I've had my own consulting firm now for 10 years, that in the corporate environment, if you there are situations where you do not feel like you had the safety and you felt like there was the CEO was out to get you or something, like you had this sense of paranoia. What I would find is that psychologically I would never be doing my best work because I would always be questioning myself
Right.
versus doing what I thought instinctively is right, versus, like you said, you're playing defense, and I'm doing things that create too much safety, and that's not me at my best. So that's fascinating. But so what are some components, when you think about it, Richard, what are the components of a good coaching strategy in your opinion?
That's a great question. So the way I'll respond to that question is, what are the things that are important to me in my coaching practice and how I approach coachees so that they have the greatest opportunity for success?
Mm,
And the first one is, coaching is about the coachee. It's not about me.
right.
If I want success for them more than they want it, then all of a sudden it becomes more about me and me trying to force them to get where I want them to go. And that's not conducive to what I consider to be a phenomenal coaching experience. I need to demonstrate curiosity, and I need to listen to understand versus judging and already knowing that I've got the right answer, because I don't. Being vulnerable with the coachee shows, one, I'm not perfect, because many times the coachees that I work with, I appreciate the fact that I may share something that's going on in my life that's not going very well. And they go, wow, okay, so you do have issues, right? Because most of our conversation is really about them and their challenges.
Sure.
So I think they appreciate not feeling alone in a boat, right? Giving advice suggests that I know what's better for the coachee, and yet I don't have to live out the consequences. So instead, what I encourage even the folks that I work with is to share an experience that has come from prior. Instead of giving the advice, what's the experience that lends itself to the advice? Mm-hmm. Right? Because then all of a sudden we empower the coachee or the person listening to choose what's pertinent for them and what isn't. And I've taught this in workshops, and that's the exact word. I feel empowered.
Right.
That people would say when they went through the differences between advice and shared experience. Another thing is I guard against the breach in confidentiality. Hmm. If I break confidentiality, all of a sudden trust with the coachee goes away, and there's no reason for them to trust me or to even share in our meetings. I need to be an advocate for the coachee. I need to be willing to be wrong. Matter of fact, I tell them my job isn't to be right. My job is to help you be right for you.
Interesting.
I don't pass judgment. I may judge what someone's doing, but I don't pass judgment. So that's about discerning differences versus saying, okay, that really wasn't good. My job is really to be more of an encourager. And so that lends me to be I get to be the good cop and they get to be the bad cop. They're going to be harder on them than I could ever be. So I get to be the encourager and help them want to strive to be better, and let them actually really kind of help them feel guilty about maybe something they knew they shouldn't have done or whatever. And the last thing is share feedback, good, bad, or indifferent, with an authentic, caring attitude, because their brain knows the difference.
That's great. Wow. That's a great list. So hopefully the audience out there are jotting down some notes along the way, because that's such a great list to be thinking about and thinking about the relationships they're having. So what we're going to do now, Richard, we're going to take a quick break. And then we'll come back with Richard Best in just a couple of minutes, and we'll continue the conversation there. Thanks so much.
You want to grow your business, but people issues are getting in the way. Managing the people side of your business is complex and can feel overwhelming. Does this sound familiar? At HR Catalyst, people strategy is our business. We create and implement a people strategy with you so you can get back to growing your business. HR Catalyst was founded in 2013 with the goal of bringing the best-in-class HR practices to small and middle market companies. We are your outsourced strategic people experts. We help you solve the people issues in your business that are slowing you down. If you have HR concerns, you can schedule a complimentary call on our website at hrcatalystconsulting.com.
Richard, thanks so much. So we just took a quick break there, and we are halfway through our conversation, but looking forward to the rest of the conversation. We're going to finish up with a couple of questions around coaching and some of your coaching work you have in your practice, and then we'll kind of slide over and segue over to emotional intelligence. So with that, do you think, quick question for you, is executive coaching or coaching itself, is it a system? Is it a process? Is it both?
Great question. I view coaching as about change, and I think change is a process that utilizes systems that are customized to the needs of the coachee. And so yeah, I think it's both.
Wow, that's interesting. No, I'm glad you kind of you gave me the politically correct answer there. So, and not tongue in cheek, of course, but so what are some of the when you think about it? Because I'm sure you may know the number, Richard. Maybe you don't know the number anymore of how many people you've coached over your career, but I'm sure it's massive. So um, so Richard, you have probably had you probably can't remember how many people you've coached over your corporate or your coaching life and career. But what would you say are when you think about typically, and again, I'll say typically, maybe there's no standard response here, but what are I'll put you on the spot to say what are two or three successful outcomes of a good coaching relationship where you're perhaps at the end of that relationship with that individual or that engagement, what makes you proud to say this is something I was able to help that person work through and help to make them more successful? What does that look, what are those two to three things look like for you?
Wow, that's an awesome question. When you said that helps me feel proud about what happened, I think that's a great way of putting it because I'm not the cause of the outcome.
Right.
But that the individual is not only had a work benefit, but a personal benefit.
Mm.
Many of the times, spousal relationships are brought up in the conversation. So that is probably one of the biggest things is that, their life is just better in general. I need to think on the second one because, really ultimately that's that I've made an impact by asking good questions. And I guess sometimes it's a little humbling when someone says, I was listening to Richard in my head, right? My inner Richard. And as kind as that is, it's a little bit humbling for me.
Right. It's interesting. I sometimes with that response, I kind of envision, of course we all have it's kind of like the angel on one shoulder and then the devil on
Mhm.
the other shoulder. Sometimes, and I know I've had that conversation too, sometimes where I'm just thinking about which shoulder was responding to that question. And sometimes unfortunately I have to be totally open. Sometimes it's not the right is not the response that was perhaps ideal in the situation. So now for the last couple of minutes we're going to be talking about here. So we wanted to kind of switch gears a little bit. And
Mhm.
this is a conversation around emotional intelligence. So I know that's a fascinating area and you've got a lot of expertise in that. So can you tell me why it is very important for leaders? I'm going to pose the question this way. Why is it important for leaders to have a high level of emotional intelligence? Or if you're in the field or you're depending on your background, then thinking about EQ. So we'll kind of
Mhm.
use EQ moving forward. So why is it so important for leaders to have a high level of EQ to be able to be effective?
Now, I love the question because as leaders move up into an organization, their responsibilities start changing. They start moving out of the tactical and more into the strategic. And as they move up higher, they're tasked more with doing things through people. And every decision they make impacts people. So for them to be more successful, one, they need to know a little bit more about themselves and how they're reacting and how their emotions are impacting them. But they also need to know about how that happens with each person that are interacting. So as they continue to move up and lead through others, it's actually EQ is more important in success, measured success, 25 to 45% than IQ.
Hmm.
So IQ is a bit lower, but IQ ends at age 17, roughly about where we can actually grow our IQ. But EQ can continue to grow through age 70.
Wow, that is fat. I did not know that statistic. So I love doing this because a lot of times the people I interview, I learn so many things. So that's what makes this exciting for me too. So how many when you think about it too, and again, you've got a wealth of experience here, Richard, how many leaders when you work with them and coach them on the concept of EQ, how many leaders there, seriously need significant amount of help in understanding why is that important for them to have a high level of EQ to be successful?
Again, an awesome question. I think it depends on part of their personality. Introverts sometimes struggle with relating to other people. And so they get energized, obviously, by not being around lots of people. But generally, even extroverts can need it. I've got one guy I'm working with for over 8 years, and he's about to move into the CEO role. And EQ is what we've been working on since we started. And he's going to continue to do it because we work on the nuances. And it's been fun watching those changes occur.
Okay, interesting. So and probably should have asked this before, but so when you think about the components of EQ, what are some of the core foundational components of EQ from your perspective?
Sure. And actually, this gets back to the assessment that I use. It's based off a model by Reuven Bar-On, who developed it the concept back in early 80s. And really, the way it's defined is a set of emotional and social skills that establish how we perceive and express ourselves. So that's about the inside. Develop and maintain social relationships with individuals. And then how do we cope with challenges? And we do that in a way that using that emotional information in effective and meaningful ways. So that's defining it, I guess, is sort of what you're asking.
Okay. Sure. No, that's great. That's perfect. So if there are business leaders, business owners, key people listening to the podcast today in the audience, if they're not really, if they haven't had a coach, an executive coach or executive, haven't been in a relationship like that, or think that they've heard feedback around, you really need to understand the emotional side of being an effective leader. What are a couple of maybe three things you can bring up today for those individuals to say, this is now the time. You shouldn't be delaying this. You should actually be starting to take action. And what would be 3 reasons you would say that this is the time to actually do something about it versus just listening to hear this is a good thing to do?
Sure. One is, do you want to make better decisions? Because increased self-awareness and awareness of others allows me to make better decisions. I've got more information to do that. Do you want better outcomes for yourself as well as your company? That's because you make better decisions. And do you want a more fulfilled life, both personally and professionally? Because when you have better outcomes, that increases the quality of life that you get to have.
Wow, that's compelling right there. So, because at the end of the day, I think even what you spoke about too, the beauty of what I think you're sharing today, Richard, is that this is not only applicable in a work environment. This is personal. This is applicable in life itself. And you think about all the hundreds of the tens or hundreds of relationships you have outside of work, that it's critical. And I think you're sharing you've shared some great things to think about, and also some great techniques there. So thank you for that. As we're getting ready to wrap up, Richard, any last thoughts any last silver bullets or golden bullets or nuggets you want to share with the audience before we kind of move into a couple of more things about yourself?
Sure. I guess the last thing is nothing ventured, nothing gained. And so leaning into the discomfort, 10% will give you advances that you didn't know you could have.
Oh, that's great. Thank you for that. So a couple more things, just, this will be it'll be an interesting exercise. I enjoy this too, but so three books. So I'm sure you have hundreds in your cadre and on your bookshelf, but 3 books you would really highly recommend that our audience checks out. What are those 3 books?
I'm going to actually cheat on this one.
Okay.
So the first book is Leadership and Self-Deception by the Arbinger Institute. It's a book that every coachee that I work with has required reading. Anatomy of Peace and The Outward Mindset are second and third books in that series that really reinforce it. So that's the cheat.
Mm-hmm.
Your Brain at Work by David Rock talks about brain threats, which we talked about a little bit earlier. And then
Right.
a book that the commander of the 301st Fighter Wing Medical Squadron, who I work with at the base there, introduced me to, is the Tao of Leadership by John Hyder. And it's a great book talking about really an outward mindset.
That is great. Well, thank you for that. And I did not mind the cheat at all. So
Okay.
that's totally appropriate there. So how about podcasts? I'm not sure if you're a person who listens to podcasts. I know sometimes you drive around a fair amount, but I don't know if you have two favorite podcasts that that you enjoy listening to.
I have one for sure, and
Yep.
that's Work Life by Adam Grant, because I'm fascinated by his desire to learn and to change to be better. So he's willing to be wrong and publicly. So I love that. And then anything that has Brene Brown in it, because her philosophy aligns with mine in terms of being vulnerable.
That's great. No, she has a lot of good stuff out there too, for sure. So how about last question is, so what advice would you give your 16-year-old self?
I love this question because I don't like to give advice. And so what I'd probably do is share with myself that as I got older and accepted Christ in my 40s, that everything that I'd gone through, the ups and the downs, will arm me with examples that I can share that will positively impact others in ways I won't understand at my age of 16.
Interesting. I love that too. And I didn't know that you came to faith later in life. So that's always, again, I love listening, hearing things about from the people I'm interviewing, just because I learned so many great things. And this is a great conversation. So with that, Richard, if somebody wanted to reach out to you and find out more about what you do and just had some more fascinating questions to ask you, or what are the mechanisms to find you online or however else?
Online, I've got a website. It's static. It's leadexecutiveconsulting.com.
Okay.
There's a contact form on there. My email address and phone number are on it as well. Would you like me to share either of those here?
Yeah, if you could, that'd be great.
Sure. rwbest@leadexecutiveconsulting.com. People have a tendency to transpose the L and T in consulting, so just be aware that it may not get to me. Phone number is 214-641-6286.
Great. Thank you so much. So, Richard, again, this has been my pleasure to actually have this conversation with you. And I've learned some new things, as I say. I learned some things in the last 30 to 40 minutes we've had a chat with, and I'll look forward to having further conversations in the future. So with that, I'll let you go, and I'll look forward to our next episode, which we'll have coming out next month. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mark.